Honestly, I think that instead of a full review, I could just replay the When Does a Man Die speech, show some screenshots of a crying Chopper, and that would pretty much summarize my thoughts on episode 7. I have a shameful confession to make. I couldn't help myself and I watched the season finale before I could record my thoughts on episode 7, so if this review ends up a little bit more lacking than usual, it's because I had some questions that were already answered in episode 8, so there's no point to theorize when I already know the outcome. I know, I'm sorry. If you want, you can call me a blue-nosed fool in the comments, and I promise I won't get mad. I considered talking about both final episodes together, but in the end I decided to still make 2 separate discussions because it's just a little bit easier to record and edit 2 shorter videos than 1 longer one. Also, I'm assuming that you've probably already seen the entire season, but in case you haven't, then I should warn you that in this video I will refer to a few things from episode 8. But before I get into the discussion of episode 7, a few quick things first. If you're new here, then all you need to know is that I'm going into season 2 blindly, other than the trailers. After season 1, I've also read the first 95 chapters of the manga, which is only the content already covered in season 1, so while in my reviews I refer to the manga sometimes, it's not about the future events. And by the way, after season 2, I will continue the manga and review it as well. Another quick reminder is please don't leave any spoilers in the comments without warning, and that includes telling me what was changed and what was kept from the source material, because I will eventually read it for myself. Thank you. With all of that out of the way, let's get to the main discussion about episode 7. I don't even know where to begin. This was a very, very special episode. Like, I'm a pretty cynical person. On a scale from Kureya to Hiriluk, I am definitely closer to Kureya, but even in my cold, dead heart, I believe that if this episode didn't just absolutely move you, then there's something wrong with you, and I'm not apologizing for pointing that out. When I saw that the first scene in this episode was Chopper being shot at, I literally had to pause the episode, take a breath, and then just prepare myself like, oh, okay, we're doing this, okay. I don't know what I expected from this episode, but it definitely wasn't this whole story. One Piece was a very emotional story from the beginning, yes, but Chopper's backstory reached diabolical levels and I absolutely love it. First, one thing that surprised me a bit is that almost the entire episode 7 was dedicated to the flashback. I expected to maybe cut back and forth from past to present, or maybe get half an episode of flashback and then the rest would be dealing with the current events, so I was definitely surprised that almost an entire episode was dedicated to the flashback with almost no interruptions, and honestly, I think it was a great decision. Moving away from the main plotline to tell a side story and developing completely new characters from zero can always be risky, but Chopper and Hiriluk's story was more than worth it. And just in general, the main beauty of One Piece, at least to me, are those side stories and those side characters and how everything is connected, even if it's indirect, but I'll talk more about that interconnectedness a bit later. So first, let's talk about Hiriluk. It seems like One Piece live action allows one F-bomb per season, so allow me to apply the same rule to my reviews and use up my F-bomb quota right now, because all I want to say about Hiriluk is what a fucking beautiful character. For the sake of some structure, I want to first discuss Hiriluk and his life philosophy separately and only then bring his relationship with the Chopper into the discussion. One thing that stood out to me is that Hiriluk used to be a robber, and he also mentioned how he used to be rich, so he definitely had to rob quite a few people for that. And it reminded me of the whole classic lesson about how money can't buy happiness. Sure, money is great. Money means safety and freedom to do whatever you want, but it's true that money alone won't solve everything, and in Hiriluk's case, it couldn't solve his health problems. And then everything was changed by nothing more than cherry blossoms. I love how it symbolizes how a person can be completely changed by something small, because it's so true. It happens in real life too. Maybe not to the degree that was shown through Hiriluk, but fictional stories still reflect real life. The thing is that there's no objectivity in how impactful something can be. Meaning is subjective. Nothing has meaning until we as people give it a meaning. So for one person, cherry blossoms would be nothing more than a background, just a nice view as they move on to other things. But for someone else, that beautiful view can create such powerful emotion that it will change their entire life, and I love that idea, that concept. Another symbolic meaning that I loved was how it's true that your emotions and psychological state are absolutely reflected in your physical health. Sure, maybe positive thoughts are unlikely to cure an incurable disease, but love and human connection and reduced stress and having a life's purpose can literally make a person feel better. It's been researched and it's been talked about how human brain is a very powerful thing and how everything is way more connected than we might think. That's the sickness Hiriluk wanted to treat. It wasn't physical, but it was a sickness of the heart. It's also a small and fun, but not really fun detail how Hiriluk, a person with the biggest heart, had specifically a heart disease himself, but it was his life's mission to treat the hearts of others, so it's just a beautiful mess. It also ties to Hiriluk's relationship with Chopper, how the little guy needed treatment not only because he was shot, but he also needed treatment for his broken and bleeding heart, but more on Chopper later. Going back to Hiriluk, the main part of this whole cherry blossom story is how it changed him. He went from being a robber to being a doctor. Maybe the worst doctor, according to Korea, but still, he was helping people. He inspired Chopper, Dalton, Korea, and Korea even finished his life's work. So with that help, Hiriluk ended up inspiring the whole drum kingdom, and it's just so beautiful how it all began with nothing more than a beautiful view. Thanks to those cherry blossoms, Hiriluk found his life's purpose. In real life, everywhere you look, most people are so lost, regardless of their age. It's so rare for someone to find their life's purpose that won't be shaken by any external setbacks. And that's why even fictional characters like Hiriluk are so inspiring to us. At first he had money, he had fame, and he was miserable. By the end of his life he had to live humbly, he had to live in hiding, but he found a family in Chopper, he had his life's purpose, and that's why even as he faced death, he could smile and say, "I've had a marvelous life." That line gave me chills, as pretty much everything else in this episode, if I'm being honest. Despite how absolutely heartbreaking and traumatic it was, episode 7, from start to finish, was still all about hope and love and healing and beauty. And if I had to judge the first 2 seasons of the One Piece live action, then in my opinion, this backstory was peak storytelling. I could speak about Hiriluk and his cherry blossoms forever, but let's move on to the other part of Hiriluk's philosophy. He was also a pirate. Maybe not one with a ship or a crew, but he was still a pirate at heart, and that's all that matters. It was so funny how Hiriluk gave this grandiose speech about his pirate flag. Then Chopper asked, "What's a pirate?" And then Hiriluk just made this very long pause before saying, "Really?" It was such a great comedic moment, but the point of that scene is how Hiriluk understood the concept of being a pirate. He called his flag a symbol of faith and a rejection of impossibilities. He said that a pirate is someone who has dreams and never gives up, and you know, this description sounds awfully familiar, doesn't it? It's crazy how Luffy, someone who's never met Hiriluk, someone who's never even heard of him until now, has the exact same philosophy. I mentioned it earlier in this video and now it's time to expand on that, but One Piece has insane interconnectedness, if such word even exists. It wasn't as apparent in Season 1, but I feel like in Season 2, both direct and indirect connections between everyone and everything is one of the main themes of the story. So what we saw in episode 7 specifically is how Luffy is a spiritual successor of Hiriluk. He has the same philosophy about being a pirate and about life. He has the same big heart. He became Chopper's new family, and just like Hiriluk, Luffy also smiled in the face of death. Another, maybe less direct comparison is how both Luffy and Hiriluk aren't perfect. Season 1 cut that part, but in the manga, during his fight against Arlong, Luffy started listing all the things he can't do. He can't use swords, he can't navigate, he can't cook, he can't tell stories, and that's why he needs other people. Hiriluk also wasn't perfect, and that's precisely what made him such a beautiful character. Earlier, I jokingly mentioned a scale from Kureha to Hiriluk, but it's true. Kureha has skills, but she closed off her heart. Hiriluk is kind of the opposite, and that's why Chopper needed the guidance from both of them to become a good doctor, just like Luffy needs other people to be a good pirate captain. I love how everything is connected and how all perspectives are presented as totally valid perspectives. Another beautiful connection was when Chopper pointed to the flag and declared, "I will become a doctor, I will become a cure-all for every disease." What was Hiriluk's goal? To create a cure-all, and maybe it wasn't how he expected that to happen, but in a way he succeeded because he raised Chopper. He also succeeded in a more literal way because Kureha finished what he started, but more on that later. Another thing I want to say is that Hiriluk's actor gave a phenomenal performance in this episode, and especially in the last scene inside the castle. It's also fun because apparently the actor's name is Mark Hiriluk, so it's like he was meant to play the role of Dr. Hiriluk. He nailed this character who's like a mad scientist on the surface, but is actually way more than just that trope. Dr. Hiriluk is a mad scientist, yes, but he's also very human. He's rooted in humanity and is defined by, in Kureya's words, his misguided, oversized heart. His final speech, "When does a man die?" I don't have words to describe how good it was. The moment he raised his hand in front of a gun and said, "You can't kill me," I was like, "Sir, I believe you." Everything was perfect. The actor's delivery, the soundtrack, the cinematography, like that rotating shot, for example. If there's any scene that deserved a rotating shot like that, then it's definitely this specific speech. And the best part is that it's a very simple idea on the surface. You die when you are forgotten, your ideas can outlive you, the death of a spirit is very much a real thing and you can die even before your actual body dies. All that stuff, there's absolutely nothing new here, but I believe that you don't need revolutionary ideas to create revolutionary art. You just need a very good execution. And One Piece made sure to execute this speech from Hiriluk perfectly. We didn't just hear his ideas. No, we actually saw them in action in how he inspired many people. We saw it in how his philosophy lives on in someone like Luffy. We saw it in how Hiriluk lived a genuinely good life and was happy doing what he was doing. We saw it in the change he created in the world. And obviously the execution of the speech scene itself was great, as I've already listed why a bit earlier. But now let's move on to the second part of discussing Hiriluk's character and talk about his relationship with Chopper. These two killed me. That's it. I'm dead. I'm just a ghost talking to you now. I don't even know where to begin. The first meeting set the tone perfectly. Chopper lashed out because naturally he was hurt and scared, and Hiriluk knew that, so he approached the situation with empathy and with kindness. Just like he didn't hold a grudge against the Drum Kingdom because he understood that those people were hurt themselves, he applied the exact same mindset on a smaller scale with the Chopper when they first met. It was just a beautiful moment when he undressed to show Chopper that he was harmless, but I think it's also very brave to show so much vulnerability, especially after being hit. And I loved how Hiriluk turned that moment into something positive later on by giving Chopper his name, because he experienced firsthand how those antlers can chop down anything. It's very cute, and also names are so humanizing. The most important thing here wasn't even the meaning behind the name, but the act of giving a name itself. And that's what Chopper needed in that moment. He needed that validation and being humanized. Another thing that Chopper needed at the time and that Hiriluk immediately provided was reassuring him that he's not a monster. He's not an abominable snowman. Instead, he's just a little guy whose name is Chopper. And what makes it even better is that as Chopper grew, his needs changed. He needed a different form of validation, and he got that from Luffy, when instead of denying that he's a monster, Luffy instead said, "Yeah, I'm a monster too. Isn't it great?" It's similar to the whole situation of learning from both Hiriluk and Kureya and how both his teachers had valid perspectives. But before I continue talking about the relationship between Hiriluk and Chopper, I have a few semi-side notes about Chopper alone. First, it wasn't just the visuals, but also the sounds that destroyed me, especially when Chopper was wounded or how he screamed when Hiriluk died. The voice actress did a fantastic job to make me feel all kinds of emotions about this little CGI guy. Another thing is Chopper's potty mouth. Both in episode 6 and in the beginning of episode 7, Chopper absolutely showed that he has a strong personality and that he is way more than just a cute little guy. But hearing him swear for the first time still took me out. I love it so much. I think that when it comes to constructing your characters, it's always fun when a character has some aspect to them that absolutely doesn't match their appearance. And I think it's also a personal thing for me because I love contrast as a tool in art. It doesn't matter if it's visual arts or if it's music or if it's storytelling, but contrast is probably my favorite tool that can be used. It's one of the main reasons why I love One Piece as a story in general. It's because it has both deep, serious emotions and themes and also completely unhinged characters and things happening. But I'm going a bit off topic. Going back to Chopper, another note that I have is that I feel so stupid for not realizing it sooner that the reason why he exists is because of a devil fruit. I was just so distracted by his cuteness that I didn't even pause to consider that, it's actually weird that a thing like him exists, isn't it? But it's fine. The devil fruit is the least interesting thing about Chopper's story. It was just an accident that allowed us to have everything else, so while it's important, it's also not the point. And the last little note I have about Chopper is his little backpack. That's it. That's the note. Going back to Chopper and Hiriluk's relationship, I adored the scene of their first fight and especially Hiriluk's words, "You need a partner to fight." Chopper is literally like a child who was still learning everything about the world and how to navigate relationships. And there's something so sweet about the idea that even when you have a disagreement with someone, it's okay because it means that you have that person in your life, that you have a friend that you can fight with. They made up by Hiriluk giving Chopper his hat that probably used to be his own, and it's a sweet physical symbol of everything else that Hiriluk gave Chopper. It was also so funny how the show applied animation logic to putting on that hat and getting it through the antlers somehow. But things like these absolutely don't bother me. One Piece live action is a very theatrical show, and it's one of the reasons why it works in the first place. No one cares about mechanical realism as long as we get emotional realism. The second fight we were shown between these two, on the other hand, was very different. This time there was no healthy communication. I understand Hiriluk because human emotions and logic sometimes want different things, but it was still really unfair for Hiriluk to assume how Chopper would feel and what would be the best for him. Like I said, I don't hate Hiriluk. Him being an imperfect person is what makes him a beautiful character, but it doesn't change the fact how devastating that scene was. Hiriluk reopened Chopper's old wounds. Other deer didn't accept Chopper for things that were out of his control. Humans didn't accept Chopper for things that were out of his control. And now Hiriluk also pretended to not accept Chopper, and it was devastating how he kept screaming, "What did I do?" Because due to his trauma, the little guy assumed that it must have been his fault somehow. Now that Chopper is with the Straw Hats, I would love to see his healing journey with them. I would love to see a moment in the future, maybe a conflict where he's confident enough to know that something wasn't his fault, instead of automatically falling back to believing that there's something wrong with him. To be fair, episode 8 had something similar when Chopper told Kureya that he was leaving, but healing isn't linear. It isn't a one and done kind of deal, so I would like to see more. The fact that all the Straw Hats, not just Luffy, are so different and weird will definitely help, but still, Chopper's trauma is rooted very deeply, so it will take a lot of time to heal. Perhaps that's why One Piece has way over 1,000 chapters. The real One Piece is Chopper's healing journey and eventually getting back to Laboon, because don't think I forgot that one. But let's go back to episode 7. I want to take a brief detour from Hiriluk and Chopper and instead talk about Kureya and her relationship to Hiriluk. Even if she felt like a side character in a story about Hiriluk and Chopper, but her role was still very important. I already mentioned how she represents the opposite end of the spectrum compared to Hiriluk. She's very skilled. The fact that she's 139 years old, despite the heavy drinking, is the best proof of that, but she also closed off her heart to people. Kureya and Hiriluk represent two sides of a single good doctor. So, in other words, when you add Kureya and Hiriluk, you get Chopper. I also enjoyed the dynamic between Kureya and Hiriluk. Deep down, they were friends despite all their differences, and it's very beautiful. I loved the scene where Hiriluk asked Kureya to finish his work. When Hiriluk began kneeling, I was immediately like, no, that's too much to ask, even before hearing his request, and I adore that Kureya agreed with me and refused what Hiriluk asked. Sure, she still did everything he asked in the end, but I find it very important that she initially refused. While relationships should always be two-sided, it's about giving and taking, but at the same time, you should never do something out of a sense of guilt or because someone made you feel like you owe something to them. Kureya took in Chopper and finished Hiriluk's work because she herself genuinely cared somewhere deep down, and not because Hiriluk asked, and I personally find this small difference very important. It's just like with Crocus. He cared about Laboon, and I believe that Calico Yorkie's request was secondary to that. Going back to Kureya, the main beauty of her character in my eyes was the ability to be open enough to change. I'll talk more about that in episode 8 discussion, but one example I can give right now is how she kept saying how Drum can't be saved, but eventually ended up trying Hiriluk's Cherry Blossoms formula, and I find this journey very beautiful. And one last tiny side note about Kureya is that I loved her laugh. Many characters in One Piece have their own unique laughs, but in Kureya's case, it somehow sounded genuinely natural. But with this detour done, let's go back to Hiriluk and Chopper. We had the scene where Hiriluk finally succeeded in creating his Cherry Blossoms formula, and he called Chopper's name more than once, by the way, because in his joy, he forgot that Chopper wasn't there anymore, and it was so heartbreaking. Of course, people want to share their joy with others. Is it really even success if you keep it to yourself? It's like, imagine if Luffy found the One Piece, but he was alone when he did that. It's just like, no, thank you. And after that, Chopper came back, beat up, and with that damn mushroom. It's like every time you think that this backstory can't get any worse, it does get worse, and the whole remaining portion of the episode felt like watching a train wreck and being unable to stop it. Chopper's line, "Or can't a reindeer be a doctor?" killed me. Hiriluk's line, "You're going to make a fine doctor one day, Chopper. I'm living proof of that," was just brutal. Diabolical, really. And the line, "Soon a monster will appear. Please don't hurt him, he is my son," was just the final drop for my sanity. Like I said at the very beginning of this video, just quoting this episode does a better job at a review than I ever could. The whole situation with the poisonous mushroom really reminded me of a quote from Apothecary Diaries, "Ignorance is a sin." Like, Chopper didn't do anything wrong. He was just a little guy who didn't know any better. Ultimately, everything was Hiriluk's own choices, but it was still very important for Chopper to get that guidance from Kureya and make sure that a tragedy like that never occurs again. So to conclude my thoughts about the flashback part, it was outstanding. I don't know how much material the manga had, but at the very least in the live action, this flashback felt like it wasn't rushed at all and was given all the time it needed to breathe. It felt like a mini-movie within a show, to the point where I even forgot that it was Kureya telling that story. When the flashback ended and we got back to Kureya and the Straw Hats, when we checked in with Zoro and Usopp, it felt genuinely disorienting, so I found this backstory insanely immersive. And that's pretty much all I have about Hiriluk and Chopper, so now let's go through a few additional notes about the rest of the episode. In the beginning, we saw Luffy and Sanji teasing Chopper. To be fair, it was genuinely funny, except the fact that it reminded Chopper of his trauma and how scared he is of people. It's a good thing that both Luffy and Sanji redeemed themselves later, but in that moment they definitely weren't helping. Another note that I took is a bit silly, but I loved how Nami called the first meal after her sickness as the best meal of her life. That's so relatable and such a universal experience. For example, I remember last year I was so sick that I couldn't eat absolutely anything. I couldn't even drink anything other than water. So after 2 whole days of not having anything other than water, I felt a bit better. I finally decided to make myself some plain white rice with nothing but a pinch of salt, and I swear I will be glorifying the taste of that plain white rice for the rest of my days. So Nami's reaction to her own soup really reminded me of that. Another note that I took is about Robin and cherry blossoms. I believe there's no direct connection between these two things, but there's room for eventual symbolic connection once we learn more about Robin. I don't want to speculate too much on this when I know that one specific spoiler about the future that I mentioned in my earlier videos, but still, I'm questioning if it's just a coincidence that Robin's introduction to the story was so close in proximity to the Drum Kingdom arc and to this flashback, so I still wanted to mention that. Another note that I took is about the Valley of Death. I don't know if that place was shown in the source material, but at least in the show, I love that we weren't shown what kind of place that is at all. What you show is important, yes, but silence can also be an equally powerful tool. It's a complete mystery what the Valley of Death is, and that's why Chopper's achievement feels even more impressive. I also want to talk about Wapol. I don't remember if I said anything about that in the last video, but the actor is doing a great job. I absolutely hate the character. He's the worst of the worst. But I love the actor's line deliveries and just the body language. Another quick and more technical note is about the soundtrack. Tony Chopper theme, both the instrumental version and the version with lyrics that we heard in episode 8, already climbed into my top 3 favorite themes of this series so far. And just in general, not just episode 7, but this entire season had great soundtrack that I probably like even more than season 1. Another thing I have is about Chopper's big little guy form. I'll admit that in episode 7 it looked weird to me, but the problem isn't that the costume or the makeup looks bad. No, none of that. The problem is that my brain couldn't process going from a fully CGI baby reindeer to an actual grown man in a costume fast enough. And I'm saying that confidently because in episode 8, when I got used to the big little guy form, he actually looked good. And it's also better for the narrative, better for the story and the themes if Chopper actually looks uncanny sometimes and not just like a cute baby reindeer all the time. And one more small detail that I adored was keeping the same voice even in the big little guy form. It has the same unexpected factor as Chopper swearing, and I don't think I've ever seen transformations in other stories done this way. Next is that I had many questions about Dalton escaping the king and all the soldiers, but episode 8 already answered that, so I'll keep that discussion for the next video. I also loved checking in on Usopp and Zoro. Last episode I mentioned how Usopp snapping at Zoro was one of the standout moments, and this episode we got a resolution, which is fitting when we saw the whole idea how you need a friend to fight from Hiriluk and Chopper. But instead of a hat, Usopp brought beer, and Zoro's double take at the bottle and how quickly he grabbed that was just perfect. And lastly, Luffy's emotional intelligence in his scene with Chopper at the end was amazing as always, but I feel like I already said enough about the importance of that scene earlier. And I think that's all I have about episode 7. Once again, I'm sorry for my impatience, but I hope that you still liked this discussion despite that. As always, thank you for listening, subscribe if you're interested, please share your thoughts in the comments, and hopefully I will see you again for the final discussion of season 2.